Welcome to Downloaded, the show where we gather the most opinionated voices in the tech field today and focus that energy on the stories impacting the tech world. I'm your host, Justin Severson, filling in for Jim Louderback. Joining me today is Liz Gannes of All Things D and Seth Rosenblatt of CNET. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks.
Hi.
So the first thing that I want to talk about is CNET just posted a story. The Justice Department's lawsuit filed April 22nd, sparked by Google's decision to rebuff the FBI's legal demands for confidential user data. The DOJ wants Google to divulge user data to the feds. Seth, can you fill us in on what's happening here?
So basically, it looks like Google is fighting the entire concept of the National Security Letter, which is a letter issued by the DOJ, like a subpoena, that does not require a warrant, and you are not allowed to tell anybody if you have been served with one. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, isn't this like a huge deal for user rights in the digital realm?
Absolutely. There's a lot of moving parts in this story. One of the most interesting aspects, I think, is that there's some speculation that this could actually be a move by Google to simply let its users know in a very loud and public way that they're doing what they can to protect their data.
But how is it a loud and public way if no one knew about the lawsuit until CNET reported on it today?
Well, they know now. It's kind of a crazy thing that the DOJ is going to such lengths to request, they're not requesting anything, they're demanding user records in a very blanket way. And this, unfortunately, is sort of, it's sort of an ongoing trend from the DOJ. They've been very heavy-handed in the past decade. And they're after as many companies as they can to get user access. We know that they've asked Facebook for a backdoor to their records. We know that they've asked Google for a backdoor. And of course, the irony is that once a company implements a backdoor that allows a government in, can be the DOJ, can be any other government in the world, then that actually decreases user security, because once a government has a backdoor, then that's just another place that can be exploited.
I mean, the security thing is a huge concern, but is something like this legal? Do they have the ability to do this and still remain within the law?
That's up for debate. Another aspect of the story is that this could be Google simply saying, we don't feel that the national security letters are legal, and they're fighting it. There was an unrelated case recently that was decided in a mixed ruling, but the decision by the judge was that NSLs are not legal. But this is an unrelated case. This is probably going to wind up going much higher than the court where it's been.
One thing that's been bandied around a lot is the idea of an electronic bill of rights. Do you think that this is like a big deal in terms of that discussion?
Well, I think it's absolutely important for Google to look like a good guy on privacy, especially as we are volunteering increasing amounts of our personal data, not just our email or our searches, but also like where we are everywhere all day, and whether there's going to be traffic on our commute on Google Now or wherever it's going. It's probably a really good time for Google to try to look like the good guy.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when you talk about user data, for some companies it's not a lot of information, but so many of us have so much data in Google. Email, location, there's essentially a complete profile of any one person.
Yeah, and I think generally people are afraid of Google because of that, not afraid of the government because of that, but it's interesting for Google to kind of step in between those places and potentially make a distinction. Another
interesting thing is that Google historically has generally complied with government requests. They've settled most of their problems that the government has had with them. This is different. This they're actually fighting on. And so there's some speculation that, although we haven't actually seen the NSL in this case, that the NSL is extremely broad in what it's demanding.
Do you think this is going to make people feel better about giving Google their information?
I don't think this is going to make people feel better about anything.
Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about the D11 conference. Tim Cook spoke at D11, talked about a lot of things from taxes to the idea of a potential Apple TV.
Actually, he didn't talk about anything.
He didn't talk about anything.
He said no comment to just about every question he was possibly answered.
So he
he very gentlemanly and politely said, I don't want to talk about anything specific.
So they brought stuff up. They said, hey, Tim, tell us about your ideas
Apple
for
TV,
wearables, computers.
Yeah,
and he
pointed at his wrist a little bit and said it was interesting. But that seriously made like a breaking news alert headline. That was him saying something's potentially interesting.
That was the biggest thing from his speech.
I mean, he did get into the taxes stuff, but he basically repeated what he had said in front of Congress last week, saying Apple pays all the taxes that it feels are due, and It's completely in line with the U.S. government. Some people feel like Apple could pay significantly more taxes. His point is just because we operate here doesn't mean we should owe everything here for all the business we do everywhere around the world. But it was kind of actually surprising because this was the second year in a row where Tim Cook had opened up D11. D is our last year D10. D was traditionally the conference where Steve Jobs did a lot of his public talking. So last year was super interesting because it's like, all right, who is this guy? How does he measure up? Okay, he seems really competent and interesting, a different personality for sure, but he has this thing under control, was the read. This year, he basically gave the same performance, but now he's been a year on the job and people really wanted more. They wanted detail. Maybe he's not going to disclose we're going to be launching a TV next year. Maybe he's not getting into specifics, but he didn't even want to answer the question, who are you as a leader?
Sure.
Which, really don't go on stage if you're not willing to say anything. 'Cause
he may be the most boring, high-profile CEO in all of tech, and possibly the world. I mean, to go up there and that kind of and speak before that kind of audience and just have absolutely nothing to say. It was. I mean, that was, I think, bigger news than anything else he actually said.
Yeah, but I mean, selfishly, my hope would be that people would stop caring quite so much about Apple. And think about there was quite a range of interesting discussions, interviews, product demos throughout the rest of the conference. And Apple gets such an undue focus from fans, from writers, from everyone. I love and use Apple products as well, but I think the level of fascination and the expectation that they're just going to surprise and delight with their public commentary as well. I don't know. I guess it's just a little overkill for my taste. Sure. And the second night speaker was Elon Musk, who was fascinating, is doing things from revolutionizing car travel to revolutionizing space travel.
Definitely.
He also hinted at the fact that he wants to revolutionize high-speed rail travel with this thing called the Hyperloop, which would basically get you on like an air hockey table from LA to San Francisco in a few minutes.
I've read about that. It seems like
that's kind of
crazy.
fun. That gets your imagination rather than some guy going, oh, well, I don't really want to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that Apple's release of an update to the iPod this week sort of sums it up. Nobody knew about that either.
And also, nobody really cares,
And
I guess.
nobody seems to care anymore.
So one of Apple's big competitors for a really long time is Microsoft. And Microsoft is bringing, well, maybe not the start button back, but one of the big things about Windows 8 was that there was no start menu, no start button. They are releasing an update, Windows 8.1, that brings back the start tool, I think it's called. So it's not a start button, but start menu. Does this seem like Microsoft sort of bungled the release of Windows 8 and is sort of doing an about face?
I think they did. I mean, when I reviewed Windows 8 last year, I said that there's a lot of very interesting things in it. It does some things very well. It does some things in a very innovative way even. But the hard part was going to be for Microsoft to educate people in how to use it. And I think that's where they really dropped the ball. I think they could have smoothed over a lot of concern and anxiety about Windows 8 if they had simply done a better job at teaching people how to use it, what it is. And unfortunately, with Windows 8, when you boot it up, you get a maybe 5-second tutorial, and it needs something more substantial just to get what the UI can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's like learning to snowboard, right? Like you spend 3 days on your butt hating yourself, and then suddenly you can glide along, but maybe with computer software it shouldn't take 3 days.
Yeah, exactly. And the other problem was that they just didn't have any killer apps. And we've seen, for example, like with HBO Go. People sort of got HBO Go and they sort of liked it, but it wasn't until Game of Thrones and there was sort of this immense drive. People wanted that show immediately. To get people really into the concept of why doesn't HBO just allow you to sign up for their app bypassing the cable service. It's the same thing with Windows 8. Until there's a killer app, something that really sells it, it's not going to grab people's imagination. I mean, I use it, I like it, but I like it for the speed and security issues, and I go straight to desktop mode.
Well, something that Apple does a lot is they change their user interface quite a bit over time, and it seems like they really stick with that. If people don't like it, don't know how to use it, they just sort of get on board.
In some ways, though, I feel like it's not fair to compare Microsoft to Apple when it comes to user interface, because Apple has such a smaller segment of the population. And we're not just talking somewhat smaller, we're talking dramatically smaller. So many more people use Windows that the onus on Microsoft to do something like this and make sure that people get it, I think, is much harder.
Liz, have you used Windows 8? What do you think about the lack of a start menu? Did that impede you at all? Have you used it at all yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a metaphorical change in the way that you're thinking about a computer, and there wasn't a lot of a ramp from one to the other. But I'm totally with you on the lack of apps. I mean, I was planning a conference where we were trying to expose a range of platforms and invite in app makers for all of them, and we worked way harder on Windows 8 apps, even with the help of Microsoft trying to put us in touch with developers to get people to even come. So it's just a ways off.
Yeah.
So do you think reintroducing a start menu-like option was the best? I mean, it seems like they got rid of it for a reason, right? Do you think that they no longer believe that was the best choice, or are they just doing this to appease their customers?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mea culpa. I mean, the nice thing about Windows 8.1 is that it will have other improvements to it. Like, for example, in the Windows App Store, or whatever they're calling it, you don't get any update information about an app when it updates. You want to know what's new. That's standard operating procedure for software going back, 2.5, 3 decades now? Why was that not in the Windows Store? What a ridiculous thing to drop. Hopefully that's going to come back. And they're making some other interface tweaks and doing things to make it easier to use. I still think that it's going to be like shifting deck chairs on the Titanic unless they make an effort to really get people to understand how to use it. And the fact that your screen doesn't stop, or what you can do with the screen doesn't stop at the edge of the screen. You have those swipe in from the edges, and I think that's really cool. And it's amazing that hasn't really been done on smartphones yet. But Microsoft really has got to do something about education here.
Speaking of raising things from the dead, Netflix has released the long-awaited 4th season of Arrested Development. Have you guys watched this yet? What do you think?
Just the beginning.
Just the beginning. How many episodes?
First 2.
First 2? What do you think so far?
I was a little busy this week, so otherwise I probably would have watched more of it.
That's an understatement.
You didn't burn through all 15 episodes like everybody else on my Twitter feed?
No, I didn't.
Did they really?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
no, it seems like actually there was one report that came out that was like 10% of Netflix users got to episode 15 on Sunday.
Good grief.
Which, I don't know. I mean, those estimates are hard, but if that's true, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I saw the first 2, not to spoil it, but...
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler
Maybe.
alert. I thought that the whole premise of the show, going back many years, really many years ago, I mean, it's hard to restart a show with the assumption that people have been, it's like 6 years later, right?
Yeah,
or 7 years
absolutely.
later. But the idea of like Michael being the straight man and everyone being crazy worked. That was the core.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden he's off too. So it's like, it feels like it's a little off kilter so far. But I hear it gets better.
It definitely seems a little strange. Seth, are you an Arrested Development fan? Did you watch it back
I'm
when it was
not,
on?
but you guys haven't met my family, so no. I'm not an Arrested Development fan, but I do think a lot about media distribution and the way they do things. And I think that it was a very curious choice to go with Arrested Development. I mean, good for Netflix. It's a high-profile show. To give all 15 episodes out at once, I think defeats the purpose of episodic storytelling. I'm a big comics reader.
Why?
Because I think that it's important to draw people back every week. It's one thing if you...
So what works in the bulk release?
After it's come out. So when I was catching up on Battlestar Galactica a few years, like just burning through season 1 like people did with Arrested Development, that was fine because I was trying to get caught up to current episodes that were already coming out. When you don't have that draw...
I don't want to watch anything every week. Like, I caught up to Mad Men after everyone had been talking about it for a few years.
Sure.
I watched the whole thing. I'm like, this is actually pretty good. And then I started watching it in real time, and it just didn't have the same effect. You can't, week to week remembering all the drama and who's hooking up with who, and who hates who, whatever in the office. Like, it doesn't have the same effect. So actually this season I watched the first one. I was like, I'm just not into this anymore. And then I saved them all up and I binge watched them last weekend, and it was a much better experience for me. That's my preferred experience.
It may have worked better with Arrested Development if they hadn't flipped the premise of the show, like you just said. And I think that it's one thing if you're doing it with something where you more or less follow the premise, even if the premise changes, as long as you're with it, it's fine. I did that with The Wire. The premise of The Wire changed every season. The characters changed. And in an Arrested Development, to flip everything after such a long hiatus, people have stopped caring.
But I think it was the perfect show to release on Netflix because it bridges this hybrid place that we're in, where it was a TV show it really came up in the age of DVDs and Hulu, which was just starting then. People found the show after it got off the air for lack of viewership, and then it became this cultural phenomenon. The internet, like the success of things like BuzzFeed, it's all about these nostalgia, like 15 things you forgot about the 80s, and so it fits into that really well. And then it is now in this time where we're experimenting with this bulk release, the binge watching release, and it's like, I think actually pretty good for that. I think it's more about the content of the show, but I don't know. I mean, the expectations were so high, it was setting itself up for failure. Just like if there had been a movie that came out in theaters, I think everyone would have bitched about that too.
Yeah. I mean, I prefer this to, a Kickstarter project to get, more people get the people making Arrested Development again, but it's just, it felt, I don't know, something about it felt weird to me. Maybe it's just that I don't care about the show at this point. I'll get to it at some point.
It's the best comedy in the history of television.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
That's high praise.
Yeah.
Better than Smothers Brothers.
Well, I think the creator actually went on record saying that when they started writing the show, they knew that it was going to be all 15 episodes at once. So the way that the episodes are constructed, they're not constructed like a normal weekly television series where each episode ends on a cliffhanger and you want to come back the next week.
Yeah, I mean, Mitch Hurwitz had actually said that he was trying to create it so you could watch it in any order, but that actually fell apart because he realized that linear storytelling is like this age-old thing for a reason. It's actually good.
What I thought is the most interesting thing is that I'm about 6 episodes in, and it almost feels like one giant episode because each episode is focused on a single character, but things that happen later on will tie back into earlier episodes and sort of inform things that are happening. So rather than a series of individual episodes, it really feels like one complete story that it does seem like it's meant more for the binge watching of, I'm going to watch a lot of these at once, which seems to be how a lot of people are using Netflix now. And I guess that goes into the question, is this the future of television distribution? Are we looking at the Netflix and Hulu, Amazon and Netflix are both coming out with their own original content.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that so House of Cards was the predecessor to this, right? And the fact that at the White House Correspondents' Dinner there was like a House of Cards parody video months after it had been bulk released and it was still relevant and interesting, like that's a pretty good signal.
A couple of months is a good signal? I mean, I want to see it have years. I mean,
there'll be another season next year. Or later this year, I don't know what the exact date is. I'm like, it would be problematic if no one was talking about Arrested Development in 3 months when the 15th episode would have been airing if it was every week, right?
I guess. Here's an example with House of Cards, and even what you were saying about Arrested Development. If you bulk release the episodes, if you hit an episode that you don't like, there's nothing to draw you back to the rest of them. You wind up stopping dead. And with episodic storytelling, the whole point is to get you coming back. I get the bulk watching, like I said. But
next week you do the dishes instead of watching TV. I mean, that happens normally.
I don't know. I think if you have a hit on your hands, like Game of Thrones or like Arrested Development could be, I think you want people coming back because that builds buzz for it. The first episode of Game of Thrones, I thought of season 1, I thought was terrible. I watched it and I hadn't read the books at that point, and I thought, I don't care about this. And my friend who made me watch it insisted, and he said, watch the second episode. Now, if it had been bulk released, I would have watched that one episode and just been done. But that second episode, I watched it, I'm like, all right, this is pretty cool. And then I spent the rest of the week thinking about it, and by the time the third episode came out, I'd been like, okay, now I really want to see what's in the third one, and then the third one, and it all builds. And without that building, if you have a built-in fan base, bulk watching works, but I don't think when you're trying to get out to a larger audience that it's going to be that effective overall.
Do you think that there are opportunities for storytelling making that binge watching experience better than something, whereas Game of Thrones, it's very each episode ends, you want to see the next one. Can you think of a situation where you would want to sort of just watch them all at once? Does it work at all?
Yeah, I think if you're already invested in a show, like BSG, like Game of Thrones, you're good. The binge watching works. If you're not invested, I don't think it gets a lot of new people watching it.
I'm sorry, I disagree with you because I do binge watch, and that the exact same thing happened with The Wire. People were like, watch a few, you have to get into it. And I watched the whole thing after it had completely been off the air, and I watched a few and I got into it. And I feel like I think you're totally right that this is unproven, that this will take time to see if, releasing everything at once versus every week or, with hiatuses or whatever is a good idea. But I don't think it's for the reasons you're stating. I mean, the whole process, the whole ridiculous process of remembering, like, if something's going to be knocked off because there are playoffs that night and if, like, you have to wait another week, like,
that I agree with. I definitely think that TV, or at least episodic shows, have to rethink how they do distribution. Distribution is a huge problem for them right now. We have technology that is so far ahead, and people want shows immediately. I mean, that's why Doctor Who took off. There was no BBC US before the revamp of Doctor Who. And why does it work? I mean, honestly, it's not a great show, but there's something about it that draws people back.
Yeah, and I think what that is
buzz
the
is incredible.
Live viewing experience. And the shows that I think do it well are the ones that people, are tweeting about while they're happening. They don't want to go on Twitter 3 hours before if you're on the West Coast because you might see spoilers. Like, if you can play to the live viewing experience, I think that's what you're losing. I don't think it's the, forgetting to watch problem.
Well, I mean, I would love to see something where, like, movie theaters sell, extremely cheap tickets. If the big movie houses,
we all want that, right?
Yeah, but for a show. So if you have a new episode, could do that. If you want to have that live viewing experience, wouldn't it be great to be able to see the latest episode of whatever the popular show is with a room full of people, and you get more of that movie experience. I'd love to see that.
So Netflix is doing this. Amazon is doing this as well. They're doing it a little differently. They released a whole bunch of pilots and actually had their customers vote on which of those pilots turned into shows.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the problem you're talking about of, like, building an audience for a show and having some people be loyal. They voted, so they want to come see it succeed. But I haven't seen any of them yet.
I haven't watched any of them either. The question that I have is that, there are some shows, like you watched the first episode of Game of Thrones, you didn't like it.
Right.
If this was the first episode and you could vote on whether or not this became a series,
yeah, I mean, that would have been it.
So do you think that we're potentially losing out on some great shows because the pilot doesn't quite live up to the potential of a possible full series?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that's normal. I mean, usually it's just some network executive doing that for you.
Sure. So
was there something about I saw a tweet about this week, something about the first episode of the pilot episode of Friends, and I was never into Friends, when it aired or now.
I won't hold that against you.
Thank you. And the pilot episode was so bad that it's almost that it's amazing that the show got greenlit in the first place, and it just happened to be a confluence of what some executive decided was needed, and this happened to plug a hole, and they gave it a shot, and it exploded on them. There has to be a hook. And I think with Game of Thrones, the hook that brought me back into the second episode, beyond my friend saying, you really have to stick around for the second episode, that will change it for you, was that there were very high production values, and certainly that show used sex to its benefit, and people like, hey, boobs, we might as well watch and see what happens. Oh, look, it's boobs and dragons. Victory.
What more do you want?
What more do you want in life?
So,
I can't wait for the knockoffs.
Hulu is another entity in this space that they are also doing original content. They have an animated series coming out done by Seth Meyers of SNL. We have so many different ways that we can get this content. Do you feel like we're sort of back at we have all these channels to subscribe to, and we've just sort of done a complete loop?
I do think that there's, in the age of data mining and things getting highly analyzed to the nth degree, I think there's a huge amount of value in educated reviews, in whether we're talking about technology or whether we're talking about entertainment, and in some ways they're very interchangeable. Being able to have an expert say, this is good, this is crap, this is good, I think that becomes more important now than ever before.
Do you think that there's too much? Like, you have to subscribe to Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu potentially to get all of the shows that you're interested in, rather than maybe an a la carte format where you can say, I do like Game of Thrones, I do like Mad Men, but I don't want to watch Arrested Development season 4.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're getting closer to that, but what you ultimately want is some kind of box that connects to your TV or your TV at Smart itself that gets everything, right? And we're getting, I mean, it's not that bad to switch between, one app or another to get to see who has the content. What I would prefer is if I had a search interface and I could find who has it and go directly to it. I think Google TV has tried to do things like that. Currently, I use a Roku primarily, so I have to go, oh, it's not on Netflix. Let's see if Amazon has it. Let's see if it's on Amazon Prime free streaming, or let's see if I have to pay for it. And that's a little bit of a bitch, but it's not that bad.
Sure.
But if you have the interface where, and actually at D11, this company called Fanhattan debuted a new set-top box that would do that.
Yeah.
But they want actually to get a cable company to partner with them, or MVNO they call it, so cable or satellite, whatever, to have just the one box. So you could go from your cable TV to your on-demand to whatever, and you just have it really, it's actually a cool like buttonless remote that you just swipe on it like a phone. It's like a glass face thing. It's designed by Ib Behar, who now has designed like everything beautiful in consumer electronics. He also did like Ouya and SodaStream and this new August door lock and Jawbone and yada yada. Here.
All the stuff everyone loves.
All the stuff everyone loves. So it's cool. It's like, it looks like a little hovercraft. So it's like you have the swipey kind of chip, or I don't know how to describe it, like a little thing you can hold in the palm of your hand, and you can swipe on that. And then to kind of put it on its dock, it magnetically suspended above the actual set-top box, which you put next to your TV. So it's like kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
I think the big thing that they need is the cable company to actually work with them, so it does become your one box that is all for all other boxes. But their idea is that they take a step back, like what you're saying, and look at what everyone has, and are not aligned with any of them. They just want you to get you to everything.
Sure.
I do think that with shows and movies, we're going to be moving towards a more of like a Google Music All Access or a Spotify, something where you get an app and the app doesn't matter, whether it's Spotify or Google or Pandora or whatever, and you are able to choose, which show you pay for and download and stream, and they all have access to them.
Like the pass-through, right? Like they get good at making something for every platform, every device you would be on, and then they make all the relationships with everyone who makes the stuff that you want to see. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's so much more complicated with shows than it is with music. I think. I think the rights holders and the stakeholders that are involved, it's far more than just a music publisher, a musician or band, and the end user.
I think neither is easy, but. Music failed so hard, so badly first that now they're coming to a point where maybe they're a little more agreeable. Possibly. I don't know. I'm not a rights negotiator.
Yeah.
So Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, which of these services are most compelling to you guys right now based on content or the way they're delivering content?
None of them.
Yeah, it's too bad. And then Hulu Plus. Are you gonna watch now? YouTube also is doing original shows.
There's a lot out there. There's a lot of money to be spent, a lot of money to be earned. Switching gears a little bit, since we've talked about some fun stuff, I want to talk about China's Cyberwar Drill. This right after Washington Post reported Chinese hackers have compromised mock-ups that form the backbone of some of the U.S. military's most important and high-tech defense technology. Is the Public Liberation Army's digital war no longer a secret? What's going on here, Seth?
Oh, we're all screwed. That's my answer to everything these days. Things suck, and they're going to get worse. I think Stuxnet was very clearly the first major public act of cyber warfare, and we are going to start seeing more and more government versus government hacks like this, and people are going to wind up being caught in the middle. Public infrastructure will definitely come under further attacks. That's going to mean power plants. That's going to mean, and honestly, like all you need is power plants. You cut off power, and we are all literally in the dark and in trouble.
Yeah, we rely on technology and electricity so much now. What are the repercussions, Liz, of our infrastructure going down at a time like this?
Yeah, they're serious. Maybe the government should be a little bit more focused on that than on pulling information records, right?
Seriously?
We do. There's been some, just in the last year, some really risky, scary examples of things being shut down because someone forgot, messed up, screwed up someone's DNS server or whatever. Yeah,
or still running Windows XP, or which is great as a piece of Swiss cheese, but it's not so effective as an operating system anymore. So.
Yeah, it was not the most carefree summer reading, but the new Eric Schmidt book on the new digital age, I believe it's called, actually lays out pretty well some of the weak points going forward in terms of like global change and in identity, in privacy, in security, in totalitarian leaders getting a hold of all of their citizens' information. Like, it actually is laid out pretty well. It goes, there's a drone chapter. It's good.
Great. I mean, I think the biggest question is, this is really changing the way how our wars are being fought, right? I mean, the human cost doesn't seem to be so much of an issue anymore. So at that point, what's the point? Why are we doing this?
It's not so much that we're hacking their internet, it's that we are going after their data, their plans for fighter planes and ships. But it's almost as if we're using drones for more targeted assassinations, and we're interfering with their ability to get their water and power to just sort of cripple them.
Yeah, but if there's a long-term optimistic approach, I think
this will be good.
It's around the fact that spreading connectivity and accessibility to people makes the world more exposed and wide open, and hopefully flushes out negative forces. It does make it possible to turn off the light switch and get everyone off, but it kind of trims out some of the cloaked secrecy and manipulations, but having everything digitized and everything online.
But I don't think that it's any better to have Google be the ultimate source of a holder of all your data versus the U.S. government or the Afghani government or anything. I think that there are so few protections, and going back to what you said about sort of a digital bill of rights, that would be wonderful. That would also have to be global, and how on earth would you enforce something like that? I wish I could be more optimistic about where things are going, but when I actually sit there and think about it, last weekend I ran a little Q&A with Grant Morrison, who's a comics writer and sort of a futurist, and I asked him, what he thought about all this stuff. And it's interesting because he doesn't even write his own emails anymore. He said he used to edit them like he would edit, a novel. So he has his wife, who's also his manager. But anyway, so he's an interesting character. But he said, we're coming to this age where we are going to basically be hybrids. We're going to have the internet connected directly into us, and no one's going to care about seeing your naked pictures online because everybody's naked pictures are going to be online. What a cheery thought. It's
not so bad.
The death of privacy.
No, it's not so bad. I mean, think about like.
Well, I have to lose a little weight first.
Well, but there's like the transition from a life that's lived somewhat offline and projected online in this kind of false, like Facebook, pretty smiling photo album way. And then there's a life that's completely online where you start to think about what you want to be exposed, what you don't want to be exposed, and you become a little smarter. I feel like we're in the middle of this transition, and that's why it's also awkward right now. But look at the rise of Snapchat. I mean, that's clearly like young people realizing that they don't want everything to be permanent. And that's a cool realization.
Interesting thing about Snapchat, in their privacy policy, they actually hold on to some data longer than people would expect, and there's all these very rough edges. This isn't a smooth thing.
I think if you're going to be pessimistic about the environment. It sucks. You can't,
that's
you
another
can't
thing
ruin
that we
the world
can,
twice, right? Like, you ruin it, it's done. But I think that there's still like a TBD on technology.
Google's very fond of talking about how they're trying to build the Star Trek communicator, right? They're going towards this thing where you speak to the computer speaks back to you, and it sort of follows you around your daily life. The problem is that in Star Trek there's no money, there's no capitalism. This stuff
they don't need it.
They don't need it, but we have not yet figured out that. And if you think that Google will suddenly turn itself into a non-profit once we achieve the Star Trek communicator, you've got another thing coming. I mean, we are in for some very dire times, I think. How's that for optimistic?
That's pretty optimistic.
Next segment.
Well, before we wrap up, I'm happy to announce Revision 3's new network, TestTube. TestTube explores science, the nature of things, life, curiosity, and all-around awesome content. You can find all the new shows at testtube.com, so be sure to check it out. That's all the time we have for this episode. I'd like to thank Liz Gannes and Seth Rosenblatt for joining me today. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or if you think you know what the future of warfare looks like, or you just want to talk about Arrested Development Season 4, post it in the comments section below. Until next time, you've been watching Download It.